Code 3: The Rise of Physical and Mental Exhaustion. The first thing I heard when I opened my eyes was the sound of the ocean lapping in the distance. Then I felt the sun flooding my bed, bathing me in light. Every morning in Provincetown, when this happened, I felt something strange in my body. It took me more than a month to realize what it was. Ever since I went through puberty, I'd thought of sleep as something I wrestled myself into and fought my way out of. I would go to bed sometimes between 1 and 3 in the morning and immediately bunch up the pillows so they supported my hunched shoulders. Then I would try to stop my mind jangling as it ran through all the things that had happened that day and all the things I would need to do when I woke up and all the things to worry about in the world. To take my mind off this internal electrical storm, I'd usually watch a noisy TV show on my laptop. Sometimes that would lull me to sleep, but more often it would awaken a new wave of anxious energy, and I would start emailing or researching again for another few hours. Finally, on most nights, I would power down by taking a few melatonin gummies and pass out. Once I was in Zimbabwe and I spoke to some rangers who, as a part of their jobs, had to knock out rhinos in order to give them medical treatment. They explained that they did it by darting them with a very powerful tranquilizer. As they described how the rhinos would stagger about in a panicked funk and then crash to the ground, I thought, hey, that's my sleep routine too. After my chemical crash, I would be woken up 6 or 7 hours later by a tech team of loud alarms. First, a radio alarm playing the BBC World Service would jolt me with the horrors of the day's news. Then, 10 minutes later, my phone would play a loud clanging alert. Then, 10 minutes after that, another alarm clock would howl. When my ability to outsleep all three finally wore off, I would stagger to my feet and immediately douse myself with enough caffeine to kill a small herd of cows. I lived on the permanent cliff edge of exhaustion. In Provincetown, when night fell, I would return to my little rooms to find there was no noise to rouse me and no portal to let in the wider world. I would go to lie in my bedroom, where the only source of light was a small reading lamp next to a pile of books. I would lie there reading and feel the paroxysms of the day slowly wend their way out of my body as I gently eased out of consciousness. I realized I had left my melatonin unused in the bathroom cabinet. One day I woke up without any alarm after sleeping for 9 hours and realized that I didn't want any coffee. This was such an alien sensation that it made me stop for a moment and stand there in my boxer shorts in the kitchen in front of the unboiling kettle staring at it. Then it finally occurred to me what I was feeling. I had awoken from my sleep feeling fully refreshed. My body didn't feel heavy. I was alert. As the weeks passed, I realized that I felt like this every day now. The last time I remembered feeling like this was when I was a child. For a long time, I had been trying to live by the rhythm of the machines, going endlessly day or night until finally the battery conked out. Now I was living by the rhythm of the sun. As the sky went dark, I gradually wound down and finally rested, and when the sun came up, I woke naturally. This was making something shift in my understanding of my body. I could see now it craved far more sleep than I normally allowed it, and when sleep came without any chemical nudging, my dreams were more vivid. It was as though my body and my mind were unclenching and then replenishing. I wondered if this was playing a role in why I was able to think more clearly and for much longer stretches than I had for years. I decided to explore the best scientific evidence about how the mysterious long stretches of unconsciousness our bodies crave and that we so often deny them might affect our ability to pay attention. In 1981, in a lab in Boston, a young research scientist was keeping people awake all through the night and all through the following day in long, yawn-strewn stretches. His job was to make sure they stayed conscious and, as he did it, to give them tasks to carry out. They had to add up numbers and then sort cards into different groups and then take part in memory tests. For example, he would show them a picture, then take it away and ask, "What color was the car in the picture I just showed you?" Charles Chisler, a tall, long-limbed man with wire-framed glasses and a deep voice, had until this moment never been interested in studying sleep. He had been taught in his medical training that when you are asleep, you are mentally switched off. This is how lots of us see sleep, as a purely passive process, a mental dead zone in which nothing of consequence happens. Who, he shrugged, would want to study switched off people? He was researching something he thought was much more important. It was a technical investigation of what time of day certain specific hormones are released in a human body. This required keeping people awake. But as the days and nights went on, Charles couldn't help but notice something. When people are kept awake, one of the first things to go is the ability to focus our attention, he told me, in a teaching room at Harvard. He had been giving his test subjects really basic tasks, but with each hour that passed, they were losing their ability to carry them out. They couldn't remember things he'd just told them or focus enough to play very simple card games, he told me. I was just stunned by how performance would deteriorate. It's one thing to say that the average performance on a memory task would be 20% worse or 30% worse. But it's another thing to say that your brain is so sluggish that it takes 10 times longer for your brain to reply to something. As people stayed awake, it seems their ability to focus fell off a cliff. In fact, if you stay awake for 19 hours straight, you become as cognitively impaired, as unable to focus and think clearly, as if you had got drunk. He found that when they were kept awake for one whole night and continued walking about the next day, Instead of taking a quarter of a second to respond to a prompt, the participants in his experiment were taking 4, 5, or 6 seconds. It's kind of amazing, he said. Charles was intrigued. Why would this be? He switched to studying sleep, and over the next 40 years, he would go on to become one of the leading figures in the world on this question, making several key breakthroughs. He runs the unit on sleep problems at one of the major hospitals in Boston, teaches at Harvard Medical School, and advises everyone from the Boston Red Sox to the U.S. Secret Service. He came to believe that, as a society, we are currently getting sleep all wrong, and it is ruining our focus. With each passing year, he warned, this has become more urgent. Today, 40% of Americans are chronically sleep deprived, getting less than the necessary minimum of 7 hours a night. In Britain, an incredible 23% are getting less than 5 hours a night. Only 15% of us wake up from our sleep feeling refreshed. This is new. Since 1942, the average amount of time a person sleeps has been slashed by an hour a night. Over the past century, the average child has lost 85 minutes of sleep every night. There is a scientific debate about the precise scale of our sleep loss, but the National Sleep Foundation has calculated that the amount of sleep we get has dropped by 20% in just 100 years. One day, Charles had an idea. He wondered if, when you are tired, you begin to experience what he called attentional blinks. This is where, initially for just a fraction of a second, you lose your ability to pay attention. To see if this was true, he started to study both alert and tired people using sophisticated technology that can track their eyes to see what they are focusing on. And at the same time, it can also scan your brain to see what is happening there. He discovered something remarkable. As you become tired, your attention will indeed blink out, for a simple reason. People think you are either awake or asleep, he told me. But he found that even if your eyes are open and you are looking around you, you can lapse, without knowing it, into a state called local sleep. This is where part of the brain is awake and part of the brain is asleep. It's called local sleep because the sleep is local to one part of the brain. In this state, you believe you are alert and mentally competent, but you aren't. You are sitting at your desk and you look awake, but parts of your brain are asleep, and you are not able to think in a sustained way. When he studied people in this state, he found amazingly sometimes their eyes were open, but they couldn't see what was in front of them. The effects of sleep deprivation, Charles found, are especially terrible for children. Adults usually respond by becoming drowsy, but kids usually respond by becoming hyperactive. He said, we are chronically sleep depriving them, so it's no shock they're exhibiting all the symptoms of sleep deficiency. The first and foremost of which is the inability to pay attention. There has now been a lot of scientific investigation into this, and there's a broad scientific consensus that if you sleep less, your attention will likely suffer. I went to the University of Minneapolis to interview professor of neuroscience and psychology, Roxanne Pritchard, who has produced some cutting-edge work on these questions. When she started teaching college students full-time in 2004, the first thing that struck her, she told me, was just how exhausted the young adults were. They would often fall asleep the moment the lecture theater lights were dimmed, and they were visibly struggling to stay awake and focused on anything. She began to study how much sleep they were getting. She discovered that, on average, a typical student has the same sleep quality as an active duty soldier or a parent of a newborn baby. As a result, the majority of them were constantly fighting off this drive to sleep. They are not able to access their neural resources. She decided to teach them the science of why their bodies need sleep, but she found herself in a strange position. The students knew they were born tired, but the problem is they've been accustomed to that since puberty, basically. They have seen their parents and grandparents chronically sleep depriving themselves too. They've grown up being accustomed to being exhausted and trying to medicate that way with caffeine or other stimulants as a state of normal. So I'm fighting against the current that says it's normal to be exhausted all the time. She started to show them some experiments. You can test the time it takes for a person to react to something. A picture that changes on a screen, say, or a ball that's thrown to them. The people with the quickest reaction times are the ones sleeping the most. She shows them, and the less they sleep, the less they see or react. This is just one way of many that shows that you are more efficient when you are rested, that it takes you less time to do things, that you don't need to have 6 screens or tabs open when you're doing your homework just to keep yourself awake. At first, when I talked with Charles and Roxanne and other sleep experts, I thought, yes, this is bad. But they are talking about really exhausted people, an outlying group of the truly knackered. But they kept explaining to me that it only takes a small amount of sleep loss for these negative effects to kick in. Roxanne showed me that if you stay awake for 18 hours, so you woke up at 6 a.m. and went to sleep at midnight, by the end of the day, your reactions are equivalent to if you had 0.05% blood alcohol. She said, stay up another 3 hours and you're the equivalent of being legally drunk, Charles explained. Many people say, well, I don't stay up all night, so I'm fine. But in fact, if you miss a couple of hours sleep every night, and you do this night after night, within a week or two, you're at the same level of performance and impairment as you would staying up all night. Everybody falls apart with 2 nights of missed sleep, or you can get to that same point by sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night and going for a couple of weeks. As I said this, I remembered 40% of us live on the brink of death. If you're not sleeping well, your body interprets that as an emergency, Roxanne said. You can deprive yourself of sleep and live. We could never raise children if we couldn't drop down on our sleep, right? We'd never survive hurricanes. You can do that, but it comes at a cost. The cost is that your body shifts into the sympathetic nervous system, John. So your body is like, uh oh, you're depriving yourself of sleep. Must be an emergency. So I'm going to make all these physiological changes to prepare yourself for that emergency. Raise your blood pressure. I'm going to make you want more fast food. I'm going to make you want more sugar for quick energy. I'm going to make your heart rate rise. So it's like all these shifts to say, I'm ready. Your body doesn't know why it's staying awake. Your brain doesn't know you're sleep deprived because you're goofing off and watching Schitt's Creek, right? It doesn't know why you're not sleeping. But the net effect is physiological, sort of alarm bell. In this bodily emergency, your brain doesn't just cut back on immediate short-term focus. It cuts off resources to other longer-term forms of focus too. When we sleep, our minds start to identify connections and patterns from what we've experienced during the day. This is one of the key sources of our creativity. It's why narcoleptic people who sleep a lot are significantly more creative. Sleep deprivation damages memory as well. When you go to bed tonight, your mind will start to transfer the things you have learned during the day into your long-term memory. Javier Castellanos, who I interviewed at New York University, where he is a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry, explained to me that you can get rest to learn a maze, and that night you can monitor what happens in their brains as they sleep. What you find is that they are retracing their steps in the maze one by one, encoding them into their long-term memory. The less you sleep, the less this happens, and the less you will be able to recall. These effects are especially powerful for children. If you deprive kids of sleep, they begin to show attention problems rapidly and often go into a manic state.